Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. We're so very excited to have you all joining us today this morning. My name is Mackenzie Markowitz. I'm on the customer support team here at Scaled Agile. Joined with me today is Leishan Gargano. She is product owner and Agile coach here with us at Scaled Agile, as well as Andrew Sales, who will be our host for the webinar today. He is our framework team product manager and as well as SAFE fellow here at Scaled Agile. Today, we're going to be diving into part 2 of our part 3 webinar series, Organizing Around Value. Part 2 today, we're going to be diving into successfully facilitating the updated 5.1 version of our value stream and art identification workshop. Without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it over to Andrew Sales.
Thank you very much, Mackenzie, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Let me get control of the slides here. And as Mackenzie mentioned, we're going to discuss facilitating the value stream and art identification workshop. These are the agenda items that we're going to cover. So we'll start by briefly talking about the purpose of the value stream and art identification workshop. Then we'll talk about some suggestions for how you might prepare for that workshop. And the bulk of the webinar will really be focused on reviewing the content of the workshop. And of course, as Mackenzie mentioned, the updates to the 5.1 version of the toolkit. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time that we can pick up any questions you may post. Leishan's also going to respond to questions along the way, so please don't wait to post your questions into the Q&A function. Now, just as a brief reminder, the Value Stream and Art Identification Workshop is part of a toolkit. It's available to all SPCs, and it's really a critical step for enterprises to move to this new organizational model, so one that's organized around value. And of course, it's during the Implementing SAFE class that SPCs are shown how to run this workshop. And you do that by carrying out a simulation during the course. But over time, we continue to add new content to the workshop, as is the case of the 5.1 version. And that's really why we want to take the time today to go through this content and also provide a refresher. And additionally, of course, as many of you all know who have run this workshop, often the SPCs will be supported by others who are helping to facilitate the event, who may not have attended SPC training, and they're also going to benefit from seeing what we covered today. Typically, as you can see from this slide, we advertise this as a one-day workshop, but shortly I'll discuss some options, times when you might consider actually running this as a 2-day event, particularly when the organization is assessing its value streams for the very first time. So the question is, why do we run this workshop? And in short, what we're trying to do is identify and organize the value stream network side of the dual operating system that you see on the slide here. And this is a really important point to make when you're facilitating the workshop. We're not looking to restructure the standing organization, the hierarchy on the right. That's not the business of this workshop. Rather, what we're trying to do is organize our development activities into value streams to regain that speed of innovation we need to be competitive in the digital age. And again, this is an important point to get over as you facilitate this event. And then, of course, by organizing that second operating system around value streams instead of departments, it offers a great way for the enterprise to focus on the customers, the products, things such as innovation and growth. And more than that, this system is going to be flexible. So it's going to be built on lean, it's going to be built on agile and safe practices. And we'll see later that it's going to allow us to organize and reorganize quickly as we need to when the strategy changes. And that's really what's at the heart of business agility. Now, because of that, because we often have to reorganize, this workshop is never a once and done. And that's another important point to communicate as you start to prepare and facilitate the event. When strategy moves, it's often the case that some degree of reorganization will be required. And indeed, in some cases, brand new value streams will be formed. Others will need to be adapted. In some cases, value streams may need to be decommissioned completely. And then, of course, it could be that you're running the workshop for a second time because you're identifying value streams and arts in a brand new SAFE portfolio. And depending on the purpose of the workshop, whether you're running it for the very first time or running it to adjust your value stream definitions, that's really going to impact how long you take to run this workshop. In my experience, if we're revisiting existing definitions, then the one-day workshop works very well. And that's what's described in the timing sheet that we include with the toolkit. But if this is the very first time we're running the workshop, then I like to run it for 2 days. And I like to end the first day once the development value streams have been identified. And this really allows time for those who are attending the workshop to sleep on those new definitions, give them some consideration, and then come back the next morning and review them. And I'll highlight that step as we go through the workshop as well. So let's talk briefly then about how do we prepare for the workshop and what does good preparation look like? And there's typically 4 steps that I find are very useful here. So within each enterprise, there's often going to be multiple safe portfolios. And for simplicity, we can roughly equate these to business units. So for example, in a telco, there could be one business unit that's focused on mobile solutions. There could be another business unit that's focused on their cloud IT business. And although the value stream identification workshop can address value streams across multiple portfolios, it can really help to ensure the right level of focus and the correct attendees to limit each workshop to a single portfolio at a time. And therefore, to create the right expectations for scoping the workshop, make sure that when you start the workshop, you put a few slides together, just confirming the different business units within the enterprise and the particular business unit that you'll be considering in the workshop that you're starting. Now, the second step really highlights one of the biggest derailers that we often see in terms of successful value stream and art identification workshop, which is to kick off the workshop without any alignment. And misalignment here is not just a question of scoping, which we just mentioned, but rather misalignment around the expectations that within the workshop, we're going to be reorganizing our development effort. And what we often see is if this comes as a surprise to any of the attendees during the workshop will often stop dead in its tracks as those attendees really struggle to understand the impact on their role and the people they manage. So ahead of the workshop, we need to take the time to set expectations with the attendees, specifically the leaders that will be affected. This could be a combination of socializing the intent and outcomes of the workshop, but also things like empathy interviews work really well here, a great way to understand their feelings and concerns and look to address those. The other thing that you're going to need going into the workshop is a recognition that there is a problem to be solved. Otherwise, you often come up against the claim that there's nothing wrong with the current way we do things. And to that end, having a well-defined problem statement that specifies the what, the when, the where, and the impact, like the one on this slide, can be really useful to mitigate this and actually get agreement to the fact there's a problem to solve ahead of time. And then, of course, even better is if we have some metrics to describe this problem. What are our current lead times? How poor are our current levels of flow efficiency? What are some of the delays that we're realizing with our current release process? And if we were to quantify those as a cost of delay, what is the financial impact? And all of these things, along with the problem statement, really help to align people within and ahead of the workshop that there's something we need to solve here, and the workshop's going to help us to do that. And then, of course, the next preparation step is to consider who should attend the workshop. And typically, I find that the attendees fall into 4 categories. You can see them on the slide here. We're going to have representatives from the LACE and other change agents who will be supporting the safe implementation, and they'll be the ones who are facilitating the workshop. And I'll talk later about how many facilitators is a good number, but typically I like 1 facilitator with each of the groups that we break out into when we start organizing groups around our operational value streams within the workshop. Executives and leaders, of course, those who have authority to support defining the Agile release trains that may be cutting across our existing silos. We want business owners and stakeholders who understand the flow of work within the operational side of the business. And then, of course, we need our technical authorities and our development managers who can identify the systems that are impacted and the people who develop those systems. Now, one question we often get is, what is a good number of attendees for the workshop? And of course, this depends in part on the scope of the workshop, but often you'll find that if you can keep the attendees to 20 or below, that provides a good number that allows it to be a fairly manageable workshop to get everyone who's attending the time and space that they need to voice their opinions. And then finally, one thing I've always found really useful as a facilitator for this workshop is to do a dry run ahead of time. So perhaps yourself, supported by those who are going to help you facilitate, and maybe some of the key sponsors, go through some of the questions that will be raised within the workshop and give some preemptive thought to what the answers might be. Now, one of the biggest questions and most challenging parts of the workshop is identifying our operational value streams. So you're not looking here to come up with the definitive answers. That'll happen within the workshop. But by going through the questions on this slide and thinking about what your operational value stream definitions may look like, is going to put you in a much better position to anticipate the questions you're going to get during the workshop itself. I also like to give some thought, knowing who's going to be attending the workshop, as to what some of the challenges might be that they're going to raise during the event. And the empathy interviews help to uncover those, of course. And then you as the facilitator can think about what some of the responses might be to help support that individual work through the challenges during those 2 days. And then finally, of course, as a group of facilitators, take the time just to discuss how you're going to work together, how you're going to manage the time boxes, and who's going to facilitate the various activities within the workshop. So now we've talked about the preparation, let's really get into the detail of the workshop itself. And what I want to do is step through slide by slide, highlight some of the key things to be aware of, let you know how you can get the most out of the exercises that are part of the workshop. And of course, as Mackenzie mentioned, highlight the key changes that we've introduced as part of 5.1. So we're going into the workshop slides now. And of course, on this slide, the facilitator will open the event, provide any necessary introductions, put in place the working agreements and go through the agenda. And the agenda of the workshop is in 3 parts. The second part, of course, is the longest part. That's what we're going to do, the value stream identification and designing the arts. And given the importance of this workshop, it's not uncommon. In fact, I would encourage it to have a senior leader, perhaps standing up at the beginning, presenting some opening remarks, expressing their personal support for this initiative. And I had a recent experience of that where we had a member of the board. They couldn't be there for the whole 2 days, but they joined us at the beginning of day 1 and day 2, and they did just that. They stood up in the front of the room, they gave their support to what it was we were trying to achieve, and that endorsement really helped us as we progressed over the next 2 days. One other thing I really like to do at this point is put a risk sheet up in the room. And this really allows the attendees to post risks or concerns they may have during the event itself, which then the facilitators can address from time to time as you would do through a PI planning event. Now, the first module, this really is there to provide an opportunity for you as a facilitator to emphasize the importance of value streams and organizing around value. And it's also there to create a baseline of understanding, since the attendees in the workshop may have attended different training at different times as well, of course. And I just want to say one thing about the training before we get into the detail here. So although you have these slides in the workshop and they allow you to review the importance of organizing around value, and they provide shortly some definitions of value streams, they're really not meant to be used as training per se. So ideally, everyone in this workshop has been through some SAFE training. Typically, it's leading SAFE. And if they haven't, make sure you as a facilitator have put some sessions in place ahead of the workshop to really build some alignment and understanding around the purpose of organizing around value within SAFE. One thing myself and Leishan are looking to add to the toolkit is a briefing deck that you can use for just this purpose. But in the meantime, something like the executive workshop or the Introducing SAFE PowerPoint presentation is a pretty good starting point. Now, of course, on this slide, you're going to talk about the benefits of organizing around value. This slide is starting now to represent how this new approach is going to help us to alleviate the problems that you likely presented at the beginning of the workshop. And we know why organizing around value is so important. It's going to help us to speed up delivery. There's going to be fewer handoffs. We're going to break down the silos, and we're going to bring together everyone from business and technology into the value stream. And that's going to give us a wonderful systems view of how we create and deliver value, which in turn is going to allow us to continuously optimize this system. And as it says on the slide, the result, faster delivery, higher quality, higher customer satisfaction. And then you get straight into the first activity. And although this looks fairly innocuous, this is a really powerful and important activity. And there's 2 reasons we do this activity. So firstly, we do it to ensure that everyone who's attending the workshop recognizes that the current way of working is not optimized for flow. But secondly, it's incredibly useful to revisit the silos that they identify and the impact on the flow when we come to review our development value stream definitions later in the workshop. In other words, does the new approach that we've designed for organizing our solution builders around value improve over the current situation? Or have we just simply replaced our existing silos by new silos? Have we designed our development value streams in a way that are not going to improve the flow of value? So for this part of the workshop, I typically have people working individually to start with, and then they start comparing in their groups, deduplicating, and then of course take some time to share back some examples, but importantly, keep all this information. We'll come back to it later when we start reflecting on our development value stream definitions. And then the next few slides provide you an opportunity just to remind the attendees what we mean by value streams in SAFE. And one thing to keep in mind, whenever you see a value stream like you do on this slide, represented by the gray chevrons, this is referring to a generic value stream. So this is neither specifically a development value stream or an operational value stream. It's purely the definition of a generic value stream. It's covering both of those circumstances. So what is a value stream? It's the steps needed to deliver value to the end user. It contains the people, the systems, the work they do, and the flow of information. And then, of course, there's a trigger. That's what creates or kicks off the creation of this value. If it's an operational value stream, the trigger could be a customer purchase order. If it's a development value stream, it could be a feature request. And one question we often get on this slide is, does the value returned always have to be financial? And the short answer is no. Non-profit organizations, public services, they may be delivering value to people in society without any direct financial return. But the important thing that you want to emphasize here is that the value streams are long-lived. We're repeating the steps continuously, we're delivering value in an ongoing manner, or we're delivering features, multiple features over time to develop and support our solutions. And of course, the goal, once we've identified the steps in the value stream, is to reduce the amount of time it takes to deliver that value, the lead time, and we do this by continuously identifying and removing delays in the process. And that's really the point to emphasize here. That's what organizing around value gives us. It gives us the visibility of these steps and the opportunity to map and measure them and feed into our improvement backlogs. And then finally, as part of the introduction, you can make sure there's a good understanding in the room as to the difference between operational and development value streams. Now, these definitions have been slightly improved in the 5.1 version, so please take time to read through them carefully. The operational value stream, of course, describes the steps that the organization follows to deliver value to their customers. In other words, this is the customer journey, if you like. And you can see the example on the slide here is an organization providing a loan to their customers. But then, of course, to operate successfully and also profitably, these operational value streams rely on solutions. And the solutions could be the operational systems they use to conduct their work, as is the example here, but they could also be the solutions they sell to their customers. And who is it that creates these solutions? It's the development value streams. So these are our solution builders. And this means that the way we need to organize them is to think carefully about the solutions they support and organize them in a way such as they can deliver new features for those solutions in the most effective manner. Now, of course, we know that the focus of SAFE is development value streams, but we're going to start the workshop by thinking very carefully about our operational value streams, because if we can get to a good agreement and understanding of how the organization delivers value to its customers, that's going to help us understand how we can best organize our development effort around the solutions that those operational value streams rely upon. So with that background in place, let's get into the real heart of the workshop, which is module 2. And this is where we do all the work to identify the value streams and design the Agile release trains that are going to realize them. Now, at the beginning of this second module, we have this slide, which you can use to highlight the steps in the workshop. And one thing I just want to highlight now is that for the 5.1 version, we've changed the terminology slightly in the steps that I've highlighted on the slide here. So if you remember from previous versions, we used to talk about identifying the systems that the operational value stream uses as an example. But as we just mentioned previously, that's not the whole picture. Sometimes we are building operational systems, but sometimes we might actually be building the products, typically software products, that the operational value stream sells or provides to their customers. So we've broadened the definition here. We've replaced system by solution, because in SAFE, we know that solution can be a system, it can be a product, it can also be a service. So much, much better way of describing and recognizing the broader application of solution to the operational value streams they support. And then, of course, the first step is to identify those operational value streams. Although this slide mentions that we're identifying an operational value stream, most likely is that you're identifying all the operational value streams in the particular portfolio or business unit that you've gathered the attendees for. And again, make sure that scoping is well understood. Now, what we find is that often identifying the organization's operational value streams can be a really tricky endeavor. And actually getting alignment around these is a crucial step before we move forward to any of the other steps in the workshop. And to try and help with this, as part of the latest set of SAFE 5 updates, we've introduced these 4 categories or 4 types of operational value stream that you see on the slide here. to really try and help organizations connect to the type of operational value streams that represent their business. So let's just go through these briefly. The first one at the top is a fulfillment operational value stream, typically fulfilling digitally enabled products and services. The example here of the loan is a good one. Others could be providing an insurance product, processing an e-commerce sales order. And then, of course, the manufacturing operational value stream. This operational value stream is converting raw materials into products, consumer products such as medical devices, complex cyber-physical systems. And then the third one is the software product operational value stream. And this recognizes organizations that are actually providing and selling software products, ERP systems, SaaS software, mobile and desktop applications. And then interestingly, the last one is a supporting operational value stream. And this recognizes those predominantly internal workflows, things like the life cycle for hiring, training, and retaining our top talent. It recognizes that actually even the internal operations of the organization rely on systems and solutions to effectively do their work. Now, having this in the workshop, I think, is going to give you three benefits. The first thing is it's going to allow you to go through these types and ask the question to the attendees, do we have any of these types within our particular organization? The second thing specifically is that the manufacturing process being identified as an operational value stream will avoid a mistake that we often see, which is where attendees start modeling that process as a development value stream. And then finally, the recognition of these supporting operational value streams is really going to allow the enterprise to consider much more clearly how do their internal operations need to be supported by particular systems and who's going to do the work to develop those systems. One thing I would say about the supporting operational value stream is typically these are going to cut across multiple portfolios within the business. It might make sense to run a dedicated workshop where you're specifically looking at the supporting operational value streams in one event. And then, of course, once you put that background in place, you can come to this slide. Simply illustrates that organizations will contain a variety of different operational value streams. And the thing you want to emphasize on this slide is that companies tend to think left to right in terms of their different lines of business. What we need to do is start thinking top to bottom in terms of how the customer actually perceives the flow of value. And again, in terms of the scope of the workshop, if you were running the workshop for the consumer banking business unit, you can see that you would likely come out with identifying three operational value streams: cards, banking, and loans. Now, again, just going back to this challenge of identifying the operational value streams, it really isn't easy. In some cases, of course, it is simple. They're simply the products and services or solutions that we deliver or sell to our customers. But in larger enterprises, it becomes much more complex. So we start seeing that value flows through many applications, many systems, across many parts of the organization. So it can be helpful to take a more analytical approach to identifying them. And one of the preparation steps I mentioned ahead of time was to take this slide and consider which of these questions would really apply to the workshop you're running. And then you can focus the attendees on those particular questions. So for example, the questions at the top will be perfect for organizations that provide predominantly digital products and services. The second set of questions will be ideal for those who are building cyber-physical systems. The third set of questions will be ideal for those who are developing and selling software products. But finally, the last set of questions are particularly interesting. This is where we're taking almost an inside-out approach. And this is where we're thinking about what is the work we currently do to build and support systems, and then asking ourselves which operational steps do they support. And this is a great set of questions to really start to tease out some of those supporting operational value streams, which may not be so obvious when we start having a look at the organization from an external point of view. And of course, you can use a combination of these questions as you see fit as well. And then we move on to the activity where the participants will be identifying the operational value streams for the first time. So reference the questions that you just highlighted to them. Give them some time, of course, to read the questions and get familiar with them. And one thing I would say here is because the operational value streams describe how the organization provides value to the customer, a fairly simple but often used trick is just to ask them, if a customer was to visit our organization's website, what kind of products and services would they see there they could potentially acquire or buy from us? And that's a good way to try and get them thinking in the right manner. Now, at this point in the workshop, I wouldn't worry about organizing them into specific groups. So just have the attendees sitting in the table groups, 7 or less people that they've come and attended the workshop in. Following this, we want to allow some time for the groups to present so we can get some agreement across the room by comparing the results and come to an understanding of what our operational value streams are. And it will be this set of operational value streams that we make the decision of which ones to take forward to analyze further in the workshop. Once we've got our set of operational value streams, then I do recommend that we start to form the groups around them for the following exercises. So ask the attendees who feels best positioned to speak to each particular operational value stream that you identify. And of course, there'll be some people that just float around the groups because they have knowledge to share across multiple. Ideally, we have a dedicated facilitator for each group. So that's one facilitator per group per operational value stream. And if there's only a very small number of operational value streams, but a fairly large group, it's perfectly permissible to let 2 groups work on the same operational value stream. In fact, that can be interesting to see some of the results that they return in terms of different ways that they've modeled it. But I just want to make one really important point about the timing here. When you see the timings on these slides, they're only meant as a guide, and you as the facilitator really need to adjust these based on the feedback you're getting from the room. If you were to continue the workshop without getting alignment at this step as to what our operational value streams are, you're going to find that each subsequent step is going to be hard for the attendees to actually support the conclusions of those steps. So if at any point you find that you need to roll over to a second event or a future date, that's a much better thing to do than forcing the attendees to come to agreement on something they don't feel comfortable with. So please keep that in mind as you go through the exercises. And then, of course, we introduced the operational value stream template. They're working in their specific groups now, most likely, around each of the operational value streams. And now they're going to add more definition to each of those operational value streams. For the 5.1 version, of course, we've added in the type that I showed you earlier. And this is referencing back to those types you introduced when you showed them the 4 categories of operational value streams. And on the next slide, again, you can see an example that's filled out. Although it's not necessary to present back after every step in the workshop, and in fact, that's going to be really it's going to be very difficult with the time boxes, I do like to present back at this step as well again. So what this is going to do is give a chance for them to present back their operational value stream definitions, allow everyone else in the workshop to provide them more feedback. And again, what we're trying to do is reach a solid foundation where we understand our operational value streams before we get into the details and the next steps in the workshop itself. This is really a critical place to build alignment before we go any further. Now, of course, in an in-person environment, at this point in their groups, we get them to set up their workspaces in the manner that you see on the slide here. But in the current environment, we know this isn't possible. And indeed, given that value also likely flows across multiple departments, even when we can co-locate or work in person again, it may always be the case that you need to bring together some attendees remotely. So one thing myself and Leishan are working on at the moment is making the Safe Collaborate templates that you may have seen in the Implementing Safe class available to all SPCs. So look out for those to come out shortly. And alongside those, we're also going to provide some guidance specifically for how to use those templates and run this workshop in a remote manner. And now back to the workshop. So one thing I think you know, if you've been through the slides before, is we have an example threaded through the workshop, which is this consumer bank loans. And it's the same one you will have recognized in the Implementing Safe class. And of course, this is an operational value stream of that fulfillment type. So now the task we want to set the attendees up to do is to map out the steps in the operational value stream, just like the example they see here. And this is the exercise slide to get them to do this. Now, in terms of the guidance I would provide them, of course, we're going to use the color coding. It's going to make it easier for you as the facilitator to monitor all the different groups and see where they are in the steps in the process. But the other thing is be mindful that the attendees don't go into too much detail here. So when we're identifying the operational value stream steps, we're looking for roughly 10 to 12 steps. That's perfectly adequate for then identifying the solutions that support them. So this is not process mapping. We're not looking for a high level of detail here. And if they need help thinking about these steps, ask them to consider how the work moves from one functional area to another and highlight those as separate steps. Now, one question we often get is, what do we do if the operational value stream branches? If it branches, my typical response is to include the step that happens most often. If the steps are very distinct, they represent different operational teams or different systems, then you can happily include both steps. And one thing, of course, to be mindful of when you start introducing these exercises is make sure the attendees don't get too far ahead. Try and get them to do one step at a time, and then you can bring them back in terms of alignment and describe the next step very quickly. Typically, I don't get each group to read out at this point. It just takes far too much time. But there are some steps later that I'll highlight where I think it is useful to read out. And then on to step 2. Once we've identified the steps in the operational value stream, once we've identified the trigger and value in the people who operate those steps, what are the solutions they rely upon? And again, you can see the example here. This loans example rely on a number of operational systems. Of course, if you were building software and selling that software to your customers, you also identify that as a solution as well. If you are modeling a manufacturing operational value stream, you'll be identifying things such as the specifications, the bills of materials, the embedded software as the solutions that you relied upon. And again, the instructions are here. They're going to use the yellow post-it notes. They're going to start by identifying all the systems that the operational value stream steps rely upon, and they're going to sketch the connections between those systems and the steps. And one thing you want to guide them here is that the solutions we're looking to identify are the solutions that we assign people, teams, or suppliers to build and develop them. So we're not looking to identify solutions that are bought off the shelf, which we no longer continue to develop. So we're not identifying things like email, productivity software, ALM tools. What we're identifying is the systems and solutions that we align people to actually build and develop. Now, one thing you may see is a huge number of solutions being identified. That can highlight that our operational value streams definitions are too broad, in which case we can go back and adjust it. But the other thing you can do if you do find that too many solutions are being identified is start to group solutions together that are tightly coupled and instead describe the broad capabilities that they provide. So recently I did a workshop for an insurance company, and we had something like 90 systems identified that the operational value stream relied upon. So we brought it up a level and we started to group those systems and describe them instead in terms of the capabilities that they supported. The core banking example that you saw on the previous slide is a good example of that. In reality, the core banking system may be many, many systems, but describing it as a single system and a single capability is useful for the workshop. Some parts of the operational value stream may not be supported by any solutions. And of course, some solutions may support multiple steps. The other thing you might find is that some solutions that you identify may occur in multiple operational value streams in the workshop. And when this happens, one thing I like to do is mark them, make a mark somehow on the sticky or the online tool that you're using. And this will leave open the possibility later in the workshop to think about whether it makes sense to centralize those systems in a single development value stream that supports multiple operational value streams. And that's probably the case with the core banking system example that we saw previously as well. If there are system replacement programs in place, make sure you represent both the old and the new systems if they're both being supported and used at the same time as well. And then the next step, once we've identified the solutions, is to identify the people who develop and support these solutions. So these are our solution builders. And as well as identifying the people, we want to identify the locations and broadly the roles that they fulfill as well. That's going to help us when we come to put our development value stream definitions in place. So again, the instructions are fairly clear. We use the blue sticky notes. We draw the connections between the people and the systems, or the solutions rather, they support. One thing I recommend here is create a separate post-it note for each group of people supporting the solution. If a team supports multiple solutions, then of course we can draw connections from them to multiple solutions. If the people are already formed into teams, we can certainly identify those teams. But if they're not, then we can leave that blank. That's no problem. But identifying the location is very useful, because then when we come to think about organizing our arts, we can certainly take that into consideration. Now, one thing to think about is when you're aggregating the total number of people, it can make sense just to simply identify full-time equivalents. So if it's a shared solution, we want to identify the number of people who support the solutions in this particular operational value stream based on the requirements we think they need to support. But in that circumstance where we do have a solution across multiple operational value streams, what I like to put on the sticky is both the number of people that need to support it in this particular instance, but also the total number of people who support it across the entire enterprise. And that's a great way then to go across all the operational value streams in the workshop and start to see if your numbers match up in terms of how many people you're asking to support that particular solution. And then suppliers, of course, we can identify suppliers during this step. I would always use a separate sticky for suppliers. If the suppliers are managing the solution outside of the organization and we don't know how many people are working on it, then of course we'll have to leave that blank for now. But certainly make sure we include the suppliers in this step. And then once we've got all the people identified, we can move to the key step, which is identifying the development value streams that we're going to organize around to build the solutions. And here you've got a slide simply providing some background on what we mean by development value streams. Because we're using the blue chevrons, we know that this slide is specifically referring to development value streams. And development value streams, of course, are going to support the operational value streams by building the solutions they rely upon to deliver value. Again, there's going to be a trigger. Typically, it's going to be a new feature request. And of course, in reality, there's lots of feature requests coming in all the time. And the steps in the development value stream will be the steps needed to define, build, validate, and deploy the features for these solutions that it supports. We put the bars between the steps on the slide as well, just to indicate the flow of information and material that's happening and implying the handoffs that take place and the people that work in these different steps. Now, what we're trying to do here in this step is really important. So what we've got is all the solutions that the operational value streams rely upon, and we're trying to organize them into development value streams by considering which of these solutions need to be updated together when we process a feature request. So in other words, which of the systems are more tightly coupled and typically need to be updated as a collective set if we want to process and deliver these features. Now, we're not worried at this point about the size of the development value streams. We'll worry about size later when we come to designing our arts. And to try and help with this endeavor, one of the things we've added in the 5.1 version of the toolkit is a series of patterns that have emerged from the field in terms of organizing these development value streams. So you've got this slide, you've got the next 3 slides that you can go through to highlight some of the patterns people in the workshop can think about as they start to organize their development effort. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these patterns, although they're shown in the context of a specific operational value stream example, they can actually be used within any of those operational value stream types. So this first example, we're revisiting the consumer loans example here, and this is a fairly common pattern in things like insurance, banking, and financial services. So to build and maintain these operational systems, we're using multiple development value streams. The first development value stream is doing all the work associated with loan origination features, and typically it's those first 3 systems that will be affected by that work. The core banking system is decoupled enough that it rarely needs to be updated or developed to process any of those loan origination features, so it's sitting within its own development value stream. So here we've created 2 development value streams, and we have the confidence that these can deliver value independently with minimal dependencies across them. Now, the second pattern is for the manufacturing operational value stream, and this is where we're developing significant cyber-physical systems. And this pattern shows some very fundamental differences between the types of development value streams that support the digital solutions and the ones that are supporting products that will be manufactured. So in this case, the value that's being delivered by these development value streams is not the product itself, but rather it's the specifications needed to manufacture and validate these products. So the focus here is really on the solution intent. It's the repository of the design specifications, the manufacturing procedures, the bill of materials, everything needed to produce this device. And the thing I want to highlight in this pattern is that you see 2 development value streams. And we see this a lot in this particular scenario. So we have one development value stream actually building the tools that the second development value stream is using to carry out their work. And this is a very common and useful separation that you're going to see in the cyber-physical domain. But of course, we can also apply it in other operational value streams as well. The third pattern describes what it might look like for operational value streams that deliver and sell software. In this example, we see that the biggest development value stream is actually building the software solution itself. So there could be hundreds or potentially thousands of developers that are involved with developing, deploying, and maintaining such a solution. But of course, the solution doesn't sell itself. So alongside that, we need one development value stream, which you can see in the middle here, that's actually building the operational systems that will process the orders and allow customers to procure the software solution. And then we also have another development value stream on the far left, which is actually developing the customer interface. So we know that the customers are going to be interfacing with the organization in various ways, through customer websites, through apps, and we've dedicated some development effort to work on the features related to that particular system. And then the final pattern that you can use in the workshop is illustrated in the context of a supporting operational value stream. And what's really interesting about this pattern is here we have a single development value stream supporting multiple operational value streams. And we haven't recognized or modeled this particular organizational approach before in the workshop, but it's very common. So there's an example here of an ERP system. It's going to support multiple internal operational value streams across the business. It may make sense to model and organize the people who work on that system into a single development value stream. So of course, you can pick and choose those patterns and use them to highlight specific elements that you want to bring to the fore in the workshop, or you can just step through them to help the attendees consider some of the alternatives they may think about when they come to do their organization. And then we take you back to the loans example. And as we mentioned in the loans example, we decided on 2 development value streams, one supporting the first 3 systems, one supporting the core banking systems, because when we start addressing the features that we have in our backlog, those are the systems that are typically updated, but very rarely do we update all 4 systems together. Now, before we get to the exercise in this particular section, there's another really important step to consider. We need to think about the additional people that we need, not necessarily to develop these solutions directly, but who may be involved to help us deliver these solutions. So as an example, in that loans example, in the first development value stream, we need marketing people. We need marketing people to help us develop promotional materials, the campaigns that we're going to use to attract customers. We're going to need the legal team members to help us understand the relevant terms and conditions of the loans being offered. And then in the second value stream, the core banking one, we're also going to need marketing to help us with our ongoing communications with customers. And both development value streams will often need some support teams to help us respond to customer requests and some operational teams as well to help manage the systems in production. So when you get to this exercise, make sure that they do both those steps. They identify the development value streams, but they also identify very carefully the additional people that need to be included to deliver the full business solution. The thing you want to emphasize on this slide very carefully is that bottom note. We don't want to worry about the size of the development value streams at this point. When we do the art design in the next step, that's when we'll think about how we can design our art to be an appropriate size so we can manage them effectively. Just make sure that you reiterate to the attendees the triggers for development value streams are new feature requests, and we can think about those to help us organize and think about the solutions we need to bring together into single development value streams. Now, when completing this step in the exercise, this is a good point now to go back and refer to the first exercise we did where we identified the silos. So what I like to do at this point in the workshop is look at all the development value stream definitions we have and get the attendees to ask themselves, are we now organized in a way that resolves the challenges that we raised with our silo organization? If we're not, this is going to prompt us then to make some adjustments to these development value streams. Now, if we are running this workshop as a 2-day event, this is where I like to stop day 1, let people go home, sleep on these definitions, come back in the morning, and then reflect on them. And the last thing I will say about this exercise is it's perfectly permissible here to allow multiple development value stream designs to emerge. If you can't get people to align around a single set of development value streams, don't force the issue. Go forward in the workshop with multiple options. It will lead to multiple art designs, but then we can validate those later in the workshop when we come to the validation step. And that's much preferable than forcing people to come to agreement when they don't feel comfortable to do it. And then that's the last step. Now we have the development value streams. We need to think about how do we organize the people within those development value streams into Agile release trains. And as everyone knows on this call, if our Agile release trains get too big, it's going to be very difficult to manage and coordinate. It'll be difficult for the people working on the Agile release trains to do their work effectively. So we use the research by Robin Dunbar. We try and keep our release trains to no more than 125 people. And then depending on how many people or the size of your development value streams, you really have 3 options. If you've got a number of small development value streams, you may choose to model them on a single Agile release train if they're closely related. If you're very lucky, a single development value stream might be able to be realized by a single Agile release train. But of course, sometimes our development value streams will be very large, and we're going to need to think about how we can break them down into multiple Agile release trains. We're going to need to model them as a large solution. And that's what I want to show you now, some of the new guidance we've added to helping to model large solutions. So of course, we want to model them in such a way that reduces the dependencies between them. We want to give each Agile release train within the solution train the ability to release independently if possible. And to help with this task, in the 5.1 workshop, we've introduced 3 organizational patterns to help us think about organizing our arts based on the work from the book Team Topologies. Many of you may know that in the Team Topologies book, there is a 4th pattern, the enabling team, but we haven't seen the pattern yet in the field where we need a whole enabling art. Maybe 2 or 3 teams work together to support the organization as enabling teams, but very rarely I think you'd ever see a whole enabling art. So we recognize 3 art topologies: the stream-aligned arts, aligned to a single valuable stream of work, a solution, a portion of the solution, but they can release independently without requiring handoffs to the other arts. The complicated subsystem art, this is where we need deep expertise, where it wouldn't make sense to ask the stream-aligned arts to pick up that work. And then the platform arts, of course, building the reusable services that the other arts can make use of. And you've got some good examples on this slide that you can go through with the attendees to help them understand a little bit better what some of these patterns may look like. So the stream-aligned arts could be organized around a customer group, a particular market segment, maybe a solution feature area, maybe a particular product. The complicated subsystem arts, again, this could be a safety critical system. Maybe it's a guidance system on an autonomous vehicle that requires deep expertise. And in the platform arts, sticking with the autonomous vehicle example, maybe this is a messaging service that the other arts consume. Again, this is a reusable platform that we can build and allow others to build on top of. And then finally, you have a single slide to introduce the discussion around suppliers. Likely, you're going to see several patterns here. So we may have suppliers who are working in more traditional methods, in which case we'll simply synchronize with their development efforts through things like the pre and post BI planning, the solution demo, the inspect and adapt. But if we do have suppliers working in a more lean and agile approach, then we can actually model them as an agile release train as well and start to integrate them within our solution trains. And then on this slide, you can see the worked example. I won't go through the whole example, but on the left-hand side, let's just have a look at the loans origination example. They've got a couple of stream-aligned arts. They could have organized them around different channels, such as online, mobile. They could have organized them around different customer groups, such as new customers or existing customers. They could have organized them around different products, such as mortgages or personal loans. But what they decided in the end was to keep the entire loan origination solution together on a single art, regardless of the different products, because these different products were so tightly and closely related. They created a separate art focusing on the channels to market, again, to help reduce some of the dependencies between the different channels. But they took a decision to keep the credit scoring system as a complicated subsystem art. Such deep expertise, actuarial knowledge was required. They've modeled that as a complicated subsystem art outside of the other 2 stream-aligned arts. Now, if you're running this workshop for repeated time, this is the point in the workshop where you're going to bring up your existing art designs, spend some time reviewing those. That'll help to remind any attendees of the challenges we might be facing with the current way of being organized. And then, of course, because they're not a single solution, there's some time now in the workshop to allow the attendees in their groups to just brainstorm some options. So using the topologies that you introduced, using some of the existing designs they may already have, think about some of the different ways they want to organize the arts. And then we get to the exercise where they're going to take those brainstormed options and start to document them in a bit more detail. Keep in mind that not everything needs to be an agile release train. So some very small development value streams may be modeled simply by 1 or 2 agile teams. But for the trains you are identifying, give them a name, make sure you identify the topology that they map to and how they're organized within that topology. And of course, make sure that you identify how many people are on those arts and the locations that they're working within. The important thing to say at this step is that we're not looking to come up with a single design option, because the very next part of the workshop is where we're going to validate which of these designs is most suitable. So allow the groups to explore different options, allow them to propose multiple alternatives, and then we'll come to the validation section. And the validation section is where we're going to go through those different options and think about which ones are best suited, coming to the fact that actually there's probably no perfect design option. Now, my experience has been that this validation testing is a very powerful part of the workshop. So instead of forcing us to arrive at a single set of definitions, we can go through a series of trade-offs to think about which scenarios certain arts might be best designed for. So you've got 3 slides here that are going to go through each of these variables. The first variable that you can describe to the group is around coordination and dependencies. So here we're going to look at the arts and ask ourselves, what level of coordination is required across them? How often do things like architectural decisions cut across multiple arts? Are there common components that sit across our arts that are going to make it very difficult to develop those components without a level of coordination? And can we actually develop and test and release independently? Or again, do we have a heavy level of coordination between them? The second validation test is a great one. Here we're going to look at some of the upcoming work we have, our portfolio and solution epics, which naturally cut across the arts. Do our art designs minimize some of the complexities involved in delivering this work? And then the final set is, what is the impact of these art designs on the organization? So as we start to bring people together from multiple departments, it's going to have an impact on how those people are managed, how they're accounted for. It's going to have an impact on new roles and training we may need to put in place. Some of the art designs may just be a step too far at this point. They may be asking for too much organizational change. So we need to take this into account as well. And you have 2 versions of this activity. You can run it either as a simple table, where you give each art a high, medium, and low rating. And this simple version is very good, where you have a small number of arts that you're being considered. Or you can use the spreadsheet that we include in the workshop itself. And the really nice thing I like about the spreadsheet is it breaks the categories down into subcategories. It gives you more granularity when you go through and start assessing these art designs. The other thing that's nice about the spreadsheet is that you can add in additional categories that are important for your organization. So one workshop that I did recently, we had one specific category within the organizational change impact to measure the impact on supplier contracts, because that was important for the organization to understand which arts might be having an impact in that area. And then, of course, this is where you do the exercise. I like to run this preferably as a whole group. It gives an opportunity for the whole room to get involved, share their art definitions, the motivations behind them, and get more impact and input in terms of the ratings that we're giving them. As it says on the slide, be careful about aggregating the data too much. Look at some of the underlying data rather than just coming up with a single number. And of course, if you're doing the validation spreadsheet approach, it can be useful to take some time ahead of the workshop to really define that spreadsheet very carefully, so you know what your criteria are going to be before you start designing your arts. And then finally, we come to document the outputs. Once we've identified the development value streams, we want to do some additional analysis around the people, the deliverables, their value proposition. And we use the development value stream canvas to capture this. We're not expecting in the workshop itself that people capture all this information. So the way I like to deliver this exercise is just to make sure that the attendees know how they're going to fill this out following the workshop. So go through an example, choose one of the development value streams in the workshop that you're happy was fairly well defined. As an example, step through some of the categories. For some of them, you may not have the information like the budget, the KPIs, and the revenue, but just make sure that the attendees know how to fill this in. So following the workshop, they can do that work. And then finally, of course, you're going to end by reminding them that we're going to run this workshop continuously. Our art definitions will evolve as we start testing them and delivering work. We're going to find that there's things we need to improve. We're going to come back to the workshop in the future to continue to reevaluate our definitions. And then the final part of the workshop is fairly short. This is where you're going to define the next steps. We need to think about which of all the arts that you defined is the one that we're going to launch first. And we've got some simple categories on this slide. Which ones have good leadership support? Which ones already have teams in place? Which ones have a clear understanding of their products? And which ones have a significant challenge to solve? The intersection of all these things is going to be the preferable art that you might want to start with. And there's a really nice exercise where you can put all the art definitions you have and go through a simple scoring mechanism to see which ones come out on top. If you have a lot of arts, one thing I like to do here is do a relative scoring. So find the art that has the least understanding of their products and solutions, and then rate the other arts compared to that. The one that comes out most preferable is likely the one you're going to start with first. And then you've got to make a critical decision. Do we launch multiple arts together, or do we do one at a time? And to make this decision, I like to consider a few things. So what is the starting position of the art? If they already have teams that we're bringing in together, maybe we can go a little faster. If they don't, we might want to do one at a time. What kind of support do we have in place? How many SPCs do we have? If we don't have many, again, maybe we do one at a time. And have we ever launched an art before? Do we have patterns and understanding of how to do this? If we do, we may have confidence in doing many together. If not, let's do one at a time. And again, this is the exercise where you can take some time with the attendees to consider the best pattern for you. Now, probably at this point, you're not going to put the implementation plan together in the workshop. So just describe how many organizations use a rolling wave PI roadmap to help describe what it is we're focusing on now, next, and later in terms of the implementation steps. And of course, the safe implementation roadmap gives you lots of good information that you can use to populate this roadmap. When you do create your roadmap, make sure you have a forcing function on there. What is the date of the first PI planning going to be for the first art you're launching? This is going to ensure that the preparation activities don't expand endlessly. It's going to keep us focused. We know we can always come back through the inspect and adapt process to improve in the future. And of course, as SPCs, you've got the program increment planning toolkit. You've also got a remote art toolkit to help in the remote art situation we find ourselves in today. And there's some great artifacts in here. And one I just want to highlight as we conclude today is the readiness checklist. So this contains everything you need, the things you can start to plot onto that implementation roadmap, the things you need to think about as you launch your art. And then, of course, you're going to finish the workshop, think about the next steps, make sure you're agreed on the art you're going to launch. Have you made an agreement on when you're going to come together to put that plan in place? Can you even perhaps agree on the forcing function, the date for that first PI planning? And that concludes the workshop. It's a critical step on the implementation roadmap, identifying value streams and arts. We've really got to get it right because it's the foundation for everything we do beyond this step. And I realize we don't have a huge amount of time for questions, but I hope the depth we went through that was very useful. I'm going to hand it back to Mackenzie now to see what's come in.